Today's guest is Sarah Casper, better known as Comprehensive Consent on the socials. She is the founder and lead educator of the New York City-based organization Comprehensive Consent, which provides consent lessons in schools, at after-school programs, and online. Many of y'all parents tell me that the consent talks are easy and that you've been having those talks with your kids since they were a toddler. However, as you move into the middle and high school age, the sex questions can start to feel more nuanced, as there's generally not a clear-cut answer, so the sex talks may start to feel more difficult. Sarah's sole focus is on consent education and breaking down this nuance. She explains how to have the consent talks at any age on her platforms, but in our chat, we decided to focus the conversation around teens and sexual consent. I ask her, what's the biggest misconception around sexual consent? What does it mean to practice consent? How can a teen navigate a first kiss experience in a consensual way? How do parents advise their teens about consent when alcohol is involved? And what do parents need to include in the consent talks during the teen years? Parents, if you've got a child in the primary or intermediate age years, definitely stay and listen, because you will see how the consent talks and the consent language that you're using in the home now is going to build into having nuanced conversations about consent in the middle and high school years. And if you've got a teen already, let's jump into it. Sarah, thanks so much for joining me and being willing to dive into the world of teen relationships, consent, and sex in the next 20 minutes. I really appreciate it.
I'm stoked to be here. Let's get into it.
Okay, awesome. So I want to focus our chat today, of course, on teen relationships and consent, because I have found that many parents feel that they're done with the consent talks. And what I mean by this is the parents that I speak to, they tell me, well, I've had the consent talks throughout childhood. I've developed bodily autonomy. I asked them for a hug or kiss. I've talked about bodily boundaries. Yet when their kid gets to the teen years, they'll just say to them, well, make sure you respect the other person, make sure you hear a yes, and they think that's the consent talk. So clearly, you and I, we both know that that is not enough. There's more to it. So let's start off. What do parents need to know, or what do they need to include in a consent talk during the teen years?
Yeah, that bodily autonomy, building up their sense of feeling comfortable saying no and recognizing their body is theirs when they're young is usually all they need to worry about, assuming that you have abuse prevention practices in place as a parent. Once you're moving on to the teen years and you still want to be using abuse prevention practices, and also they're on their own peer-to-peer relationships, possibly experiencing normative, healthy sexual or romantic interactions. And for those, the conversations become much more nuanced, mostly because talking about sex and romance is not something that's often done. It's not modeled for us. And so it can get really tricky and awkward. So the first thing I recommend for parents to do is kind of not have the big talk with their kids, as we both know, but like small talks throughout. We're just talking about sex and bodies is just a conversation, so that they can get familiar with doing those things. The second is really starting to hone in on the nuances of sexual consent and what makes sexual consent tricky. And kids know, right? It often feels like as parents, we need to like deliver the information to the kids and tell them why it's tricky, but actually asking them, like, what have you talked about? What have you seen in movies? What, like, do you think consent is simple? What might not make it simple? And if they don't have those answers, if they're like, no, it's easy, you ask and you say no, then you can complicate things for them. But yeah, starting with building up a sense of bodily autonomy when they're young, having small talks to just normalize talking about sex and bodies, so that when consent becomes more focused on sex and bodies, they have a fluency, and getting into those nuances and talking about what makes sexual touch different than platonic touch.
Yes, those are really great things. I mean, I think that's the thing, is telling parents you've done a really good foundation at the younger age, but this is how it's going to build. This is how you're going to see the transition, because I think for many parents, they don't quite transition. And I'm so excited that my followers are not following you on Instagram or on TikTok, that they start to, because your daily dose of consent, education and values and explanations is so worth it to kind of wrap your brain around it. For example, like you explained consent as a practice, and I think that could be very useful here. Like, could you
Yeah.
maybe do that
Yeah.
again?
Yes, I would. That is probably one of the things that I say the most often is I don't talk about often the giving and getting of consent, because again, part of the conversations you want to be having with your child is about like the laws, and it's important for them to know the laws.
Mhm.
But just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. Just because it's ethical doesn't mean it's legal. And so having that conversation about, it's not just about getting consent, but it is about practicing consent. When I hear the phrase getting consent, I feel often that the word consent can be replaced with permission. Getting permission. Can I kiss you? Yes. Is it okay if I hug you? Yes. And it's transactional. One person wants something and the other person is the gatekeeper of it. And I really think of consent as more of a co-created experience. Both people are creating it, involved in creating it, involved in nurturing it, so that it's actually ongoing. And asking for permission is one element of a consent practice, but so is paying attention to body language, being aware of power dynamics, knowing how to handle a no, knowing how to be accountable when you mess up and you do touch someone in a way they're not comfortable with, in like a low level way. All of those are pieces that build to a practice of consent, and expand it beyond just giving and getting a yes, because that will, while that legally does good stuff, it doesn't necessarily ethically or morally do so.
Right. It
Right.
doesn't build a relationship, right?
That question is not, as I'm forgetting which researcher says it, but isn't moral magic, right? It doesn't build the connection. It doesn't build it doesn't build what we actually want for our kids, which is healthy communication,
Right.
respect, things like that.
Yeah. Like the one that you recently did was comparing it to kindness, right? You just don't go up to somebody and say you're kind, right? You're like I did that and that was kind. I'm
Right.
done, right? And I think that's really helpful. Like that's why I really hope people follow you where they follow social media. And I follow you on Instagram, and I just love it. I think it really does help to get, and this is what I tell parents a lot of times: follow me on Instagram. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to comment, but just hearing it on a regular basis will make it somewhat easier to have the conversation.
And it will make it easy for your kid when you do the same. Where again, it's not that one sit down, like you have to like focus on getting all the information at once, but in little bits said different ways, that's how it actually integrates.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So you're still teaching in the classroom, right? Like schools can book you to come
Absolutely.
in and
Yes,
speak.
absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I've linked to your website in the description. So if schools do want to book you, and you do it in person as well as online, correct?
Yep, in person.
Yep.
I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, so anywhere in the tri-state area. And then, although I have also traveled further, but then also virtually makes it
Yeah,
easy for
does
everyone.
make it easy. So yeah, so it's definitely worth it. So I was a sex ed teacher in the classroom in the late 2000s, and it's exhausting and it's hard. So thank you for continuing to do this work. When I taught consent, it was very limited. It was really around negotiation skills and developing the ability to say no. And this was like the late, 2000s, 2008, 9. And that's where it was. How has it changed? How has consent being taught in high school changed? Are we still teaching them how to say no, or what's happening in the classroom?
Yeah, there's definitely still a teaching of like saying no or refusal skills. There is more of a focus on a yes means yes model rather than a
Mm-hmm.
no means no model. So no means no means like do something until someone says no, where yes means yes is before you do something, hear a yes,
Mm-hmm.
which we very much see the benefits of it. After the yes, still someone can say no and we respect it, but we really aim for the yes first. So that's one of the biggest changes I would say since then. And then also the idea of enthusiastic consent. is a lot more popular, is gaining popularity now. And that's recognizing that for reasons that have to do with power dynamics, gender norms, sometimes a person might say yes in a way that is not a real yes. It's like, sure, okay, I guess, because
Right.
either they've been told it's rude to say no, right? They haven't had that
Not cultural.
foundational, your body is yours. It's not mean to say no. It's just preference, that you don't want that right now. Um, or it's an authority person, an authority figure, or has some kind of other power dynamic. Popularity can be one, especially with kids, like, oh, this person's popular, so how can I dare say no to him? Yes, even though I'm not sure. And
Right.
so while I think enthusiasm is can be kind of subjective and is perhaps a bar that we don't need to meet to reach every time, I think having the conversation around different kinds of yeses and why people might say yes even though they don't mean it can help support more comprehensive consent practices.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So, well, yeah, I mean, it's that sounds really good. And it seems like more focus is on that because I would go in and it would be like a 20-minute little, okay, don't forget to teach them how to say no and how to refuse and offer a different thing to do with that person besides have sex. So that's, so it's definitely getting better at the same time. So that's good. Um, I talk to a lot of parents, and you kind of just touched on this just a second ago. Every now and then, I will get a parent, and maybe you do too, and it's usually a dad who will say to me, you want to take the romance out of everything. You want me to tell my son in the middle of the moment to stop and ask her if she wants to be kissed, when clearly her body language is saying, yes, kiss me. Now, putting aside all the heteronormative assumptions that this parent has made, you and I are not here to bring down romance, of course, right? Clarifying consent doesn't eliminate romance, but how would you respond to this, dad? How do parents help a teen navigate a first kiss experience in a consensual way?
It is a question I get quite a lot. Often there are people compare it to a contract. Well, my kid sign a contract before he does this or something. I'm like, no, 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 that's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
They take it all the way to the extreme, right? Like
all
it's
the way
just
to the
all the
extreme.
way.
And this actually brings back to your last question of how have things changed. So not so much in high schools, but definitely in colleges, the idea of consent is sexy is now popular.
Mm.
And again, I see the benefit of that message for sure. And also, I like to in the classrooms remind people that like consent might not be sexy actually. It might be really awkward. You might stumble over your words and like I know when I'm getting nervous like I kind of like bring my shoulders in and like I do like awkward kind of wiggles and like that's fine and it might not be sexy, but it's still important that I go through whatever I got to go through to get to a place where I'm making sure that I'm respecting someone's body boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be one person might find it not romantic, but you also are going to save yourself from potentially touching someone in a way they don't want at best, which feels weird saying, or like assaulting them at worst.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, but in some way, if you're not checking, you have no way to know. And if you're noticing that, like, their body language is giving you a little something, that's a cue that that's a great time to ask. If their
Yes.
body language isn't
Exactly.
giving you that, then maybe it's a good cue to like pause on asking.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one is like you can or you can't, but like how do we use that as information and see what does that person want, not can I get a kiss?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think this is where I tell parents this is everything you've been building towards. Every time your child touched a pet and the pet walked away, you told them, look at their body language. They're walking away from you. They are not interested in being petted. Do not chase them. Right? Like you're building towards this level of conversation and nuance because it is, like you say, there's so much nuance. And so, yeah, so you're not taking the romance out. You're actually either clarifying it or, helping the other person get comfortable to their point of consenting to the situation. And helping them, yeah, like you said, I love that, pointing out the point where it's a great time to ask, right? Where you feel like you're on the same page, because then they'll say yes, kiss me, right? And how great is that?
It also, I find that one of the big things that consent, like that permission question, as that first question does, is also just set the tone of, I am open to hearing a yes or a no. Of like,
Mm-hmm.
I am trying not to make assumptions. I might slip up, but like I am trying not to make assumptions. Do you want this? Yes or no? And then if at some point you do, graze a boundary that like or cross a boundary that wasn't okay with them, that also can that has that foundational work of that person can say, "Oh, I wish you would have asked me for that."
Yeah.
It feels more comfortable to say that because they know that you already have that skill somewhat within you.
Right. It kind of goes to your example of one of your reels where you're like, you have this person who's just practicing because all their friends are kind of think consent is cool, and then this person is, they actually do value consent and they've made a mistake or they've grazed a boundary, like you said. And I think that's really helpful for parents to see that it's about the intent, it's about the practice, it's about just getting them to think about it in a non-contractual way, but making everyone happy and comfortable, right? That's where we're getting to here. That's what we want. So
Absolutely.
another tricky area that parents talk to me about often is prepping their teens to go off to college or university or go overseas for a study abroad or for something where the consumption of alcohol is now either legal or it's available.
Mhm.
So what's your advice for parents on how to talk about consent or the ability to consent when alcohol is now being consumed?
Yeah, this is layered. And again, where we get into legal and ethical kind of muddy waters.
And
Uh,
yes, absolutely. I agree with you. And these are the reasons why I'm bringing it up. And I think this is really important to highlight for parents having this conversation with you, is that the nuance is so great. This is why you've been having the conversations building up to this point.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, yeah. I again recommend, like, if your child has an opinion on this, find that out first before you put information onto them. But like, do you think it's okay? Do you think it's not okay? Most likely they will say it's okay. And it's not because they're trying to take advantage of someone. It's because every movie they've watched about college has shown that hooking up and drinking is totally okay.
Yeah.
There are some instances where it's not, but they're not clearly differentiated from the instances that are. Like, what makes that storyline not okay, but every other storyline was okay.
Right.
Um, and so that can have a lot of undoing. So try to, again, like, help them. I think of consent as helping kids, helping people make better decisions. So how does alcohol impact decision making? How do you want to take that into account when you're interacting with a partner?
Mhm.
Take into account that these are the laws, these are the laws, and these are the laws, right?
Right.
Help them know that. And these could be the consequences, both legal and also emotional. I have a very like strong rule of thumb. You don't do anything with the first time with someone when they've been drinking.
Mhm.
I don't think it's practical for me to tell someone who's going off to college and say you can never drink and have and do anything with
Right.
someone. It's not going to work. And I actually don't think it's necessary. I'll have a glass of wine on a date and then I might, make out with someone, and that's totally, most of us would say that's totally okay.
Right.
Um, so talking about, which also brings me to the difference between like drinking and drunk. And sometimes that line is more clear and sometimes that's less clear. But
Mhm.
definitely, if you've never met this person before, if you've never done something with this person before, it's not a good idea, especially when you're young and these are new experiences. So you're not as
Mhm.
fluent in talking about sex. And these are new intoxicated in experiences, so you don't know how you are and how you react and who that person is because you've never met them before, so you've definitely never had drinks with them before,
Right.
and found out their comfortability around that. Safest is to not drink and do anything 100%,
Right.
because I don't think many kids will do that. I'm going to ask them to grapple.
Have them make these conversations, have them talk about it. And I think that's really comes across from your accounts is how do you help your kids to talk about these before they're put in the situation, because it's all about prep. It's honestly all about prep. I taught college level courses and I would have students come up and they'll be like, oh, so, this thing, happened. And then, I had older students. And when I taught overseas, they were like, you want to have a beer with me after? And I was like, I'm American and this is weird. um, but yes, it is about getting them to that point of considering this, and this. And it doesn't all have to be negative, right? What would be a better experience, right? What could be a more positive experience? And I think you're highlighting that.
Yeah, I love that you just brought in pleasure, basically.
Right.
Right. How are you going to be attuned? Do you want them to feel good? Great. How are you going to be attuned to your pleasure if your brain is in another space? It's and like get them to see the connection where it's not just you're not just not drinking and having sexual experiences with someone because it's
Right.
illegal, but what are the like person to person relational
Right.
aspects?
Aspects. It kind of goes to these parenting or mom accounts of reels and TikToks that I see where they're like, 1 glass of wine, she's like, okay, everything's good. 2 glasses of wine, 3, we better do it now or it's going to get messy, right? Like she's saying that to her husband, and then 4, and then 5, they're passed out and then nothing has happened, right? So it kind of goes to that humorous of, right? Like having a glass of wine can be fine, like having a drink with someone, it's not wrong to do that, but you have to know, okay, when does it get to where it may be difficult? And I like that you say maybe it's definitely not with a person for the first time that you've met them. And, I think there's some boundaries that parents can put in place that you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Or
that kids can put in place for themselves also.
Yes, the parents can guide them, and then they ultimately are making the decisions, right? I mean, I think I say that to like my 7-year-old all the time. I'm like, you know what? I am here to help you. You are going to make your own decisions, and I am just here to help you so that these are the potential consequences. Because as you get older, I'm not going to be there, and I want you to think about it. And I don't know if she gets it yet, but I say it to her all the time.
It's a hard thing for parents to accept. For sure.
Yeah.
It's that I can't, but I want to protect you so badly.
Yeah, I know it is. Exactly. So yeah, we're almost running out of time. I'm definitely, if not, I'm already encouraging my community of followers to definitely follow you because you break down the nuance of consent so well. And I would love to know, what do you think is the biggest misconception around sexual consent that parents of teens need to be aware of?
I think it's what I already talked about that it's not just something you give and you get, that it's something that really is a practice, and starting to use that language about specifically for everyday things. I tend to not say like, oh, did you give grandma consent for that hug? I'm like, oh, did you say that was okay? And kind of using everyday language to help them understand, or like, oh, what is their body language saying with the pet, with the whomever, so that they start just understanding that, oh, this is how I interact with people, with animals, with other people's belongings. Right. This is just what I do. I pay attention. That was one of my favorite. I ended a virtual session with a bunch of 8th graders. It was 4 sessions. This was the last one. And I said, the closing question was, so talked about practicing consent. How do you know if you're practicing consent? It's a very different question from how do you know if you got consent?
Yeah. What did 8th graders say?
And I had something prepared. And of course, this one 8th grader blew me out of the water. She said, well, in like a very 8th grade way, we're like, I feel like it's not a big deal, but I feel like it's just like paying attention more. And I'm just like, that's exactly what it is. It's paying attention to yourself, paying attention to the other person, paying attention to your power, their power, paying attention to your surroundings. How does the space that you're in impact consent? And if you're paying attention and making decisions with care for the other person and for yourself, it's gonna be a lot better to have a consensual, fun, comfortable, pleasurable experience than if the focus is on, did I get a yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember teaching in the classrooms, like middle schoolers, high schoolers, they will surprise you because they are really listening. They really want this information and yeah, I mean, and they say it back so well. So that's awesome. That's really, really awesome. So, all right. I think we are kind of at time. It's 20 minutes does go by so fast. I will link all of your social media handles and your website in the description so people can follow you. And honestly, folks, if you're not following her already, please go do comprehensive consent. I promise you, you will learn something from Sarah. You absolutely will. Is there anything that you would like to share with folks? Anything to promote or share with folks? Any courses that you have coming up?
Sure, yeah. I have a bunch of recorded classes on my website, both for adults in terms of how they're interacting with consent and for parents. For kids, I have a mindfulness for consent skills curriculum for teachers of first to fourth graders. And I also want to plug your Instagram and TikTok because I learn from you all the time too. And that's how we got connected and got to know each other. So yeah, I'm just so glad we had this conversation and your help getting this information out here in sex ed in general. So thank you.
It goes together. It really does. Consent and sex. I mean, very much goes together. But yeah, no, I think it's awesome. And hopefully, yes, I will actually link to those courses as well on your website so people can easily access it in the description. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here, for talking to me. And I hope everybody listening learned something. All right. Take care.